move a lot. My back's bugging me tonight, okay? I may ask you for a massage, but don't be awkward. Don't feel awkward. Oh. Good evening and welcome to the Monomoy Regional School District School Committee meeting, Thursday, January 23rd, 2020 at 6:30. I call the meeting to order at 6:35. First item on the agenda is to approve the minutes from the January 9th, 2020 meeting. Is there a motion for approval? Or, excuse me, any questions or comments? Do I hear a motion of approval?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
I abstain.
Excuse me, abstentions, opposition. Motion carries. At this time, we offer an opportunity for the public to speak. If there's anyone here who would like to come up for public comment, that would be a great time. Okay. Seeing none, we're going to be moving on to the student representative this evening.
Good evening, everybody. Monomoy students have been very busy since I reported to you last. In December, senior Sage Barnes was awarded Chatham Rotary Student of the Month for November. And between finishing college applications and receiving acceptances, seniors were also excited to get measured for their graduation caps and gowns. Monomoy students have exemplified their dedication to their fields outside of the school walls. Members of the field hockey team went over to the middle school and helped run a before-school hockey club. And the music department had incredible success for the All Cape and Islands Music Festival, where 43 students auditioned and all 43 were accepted. For the holiday season, students submitted stories they wrote to the Cape Cod Chronicle for the Holiday Story Contest. Courtney Kelly, Olivia Appleton, Tian Jameson, and Joey Vacan won the top prizes and got their Christmas stories published. The students got a very nice holiday surprise before break when the Harwich Elementary School choir came and sang carols in the hallway during our Jossam hour, and these kids brought great joy to everyone in the building. And you should save the date for the upcoming spring musical, Les Mis, which will be shown on March 18th, 19th, 20th, and 21st. And to celebrate the winter season, each class decorated a holiday tree in our main hallway. The seniors won the overall prize. Dedicated seniors such as Jenna Greco, Julie Slades, and Caitlin Lyon decorated the tree in graduation cap ornaments with all the seniors' names on them. And they also handmade and decorated cards with kind words to every department in our school. We also had a winter pep rally on the last day before break. This was one of the most exciting pep rallies the school has ever seen, from funny games to the riveting student versus staff basketball match. And when we came back from break, the marine science class performed autopsies on the Kemp's Ridley sea turtles that were found stranded on beaches with help from Mass Audubon. They worked with scientists to dissect turtles and examine their anatomy. And their hard work resulted in data that will be used in future sea turtle population studies. Student athletes have been working very hard after the holiday break. This month, the girls' basketball team beat Sturgis East 45-38. They lost to Nantucket 53-40 and to Martha's Vineyard 35-33. But boys' basketball ultimately lost to Nauset 57-35, but redeemed themselves with a win against Plymouth South 51-43. The boys basketball team also beat Sturgis East 62-35. And boys hockey tied with East Bridgewater 1-1 and lost to Nantucket 4-2. Girls hockey had a series of ties with Bishop Staying, Plymouth South, and with Falmouth. And Sage Barnes received the Superintendent's Award for Academic Excellence. She received this based on academic merit, her outstanding dedication to music, and her incredible civic accomplishments. Sage is so kind and so humble, so the school is so proud of her for this accomplishment. And the class of 2021 is holding a fundraiser for their junior prom at the Cape Sea Grill tomorrow night from 6 to 9 p.m. There is a $10 admission, cash bar, silent auction, and hors d'oeuvres, and it's for people 21 and over. This is going to be a great time, so please go and tell your friends. The AP Government and Kennedy Years classes traveled to the Senate simulation at the Edward M. Kennedy Institute thanks to a generous grant from the JFK Museum in Hyannis. We got to participate in the Senate Immersion module in a full-scale replica of the U.S. Senate chamber. We played real senators from the Great Depression and worked together to pass legislation. Nice. And on Tuesday, January 14th, the representatives from Dollars for Scholars program presented for the seniors during Jossam. Seniors are working hard to get a head start on these very important scholarship applications. And back to sports. Boys hockey beat Nauset 2-1 with both goals from Wyatt Archibald. Boys basketball had a very exciting win over DY Dolphins, 45-41, with a big comeback from the second half. Girls basketball lost to DY 44-40. Boys basketball also beat St. John Paul 74-25, but the girls lost to SJP 42-27. The boys basketball team lost to Cape Cod Academy 61-56, but the girls came on top 40-35. And boys hockey lost to DY 5-1, but the girls hockey beat Nantucket 10-5. And finally, this week, students have been hitting the books, studying very hard for midterms. The next few weeks are going to be exciting, from upcoming mock trial matches, sports games, and preparation for the spring musical. I'm looking forward to reporting to you next month on all of our great news. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Sounds very exciting. Any questions or comments this evening, other than lots of exciting stuff? And Les Mis is coming. That's awesome.
Yes.
Thank you. Fantastic. Great. Thank you so much. Next up would be recognitions. Dr. Carpenter.
We'd like to thank the following for their support and contributions to Monomoy. First, the Cape Cod Club of MIT for their grant in the amount of $400 to the high school for Larry Souza and the Technology and Engineering Department. The Friends of Trees grant for $1,750 donation to help support the middle school field trip, and the Nauset Garden Club for their Go Green mini grant in the amount of $500 to Harwich Elementary School. And we'd also like to thank the following donations to Chatham Elementary School. These were offered as door prizes at Chatham Elementary School's Deep Learning Family Night that the teachers were speaking about the last time we met. These door prizes were provided by the Provincetown Art Association and Museum, who donated a one-year family membership, 1 week of sailing and Science Day camp at Pleasant Bay Community Boating for the week of someone's choice, which was a $500 value provided by Pleasant Bay Community Boating and Sarah Grisham. Family membership to the Atwood Museum, a set of 4 individual day passes to the Atwood Museum donated by Executive Director Danielle Jinglaz and Jamie Seldrog, and a family 4-pack to the Shark Conservatory donated by Director Marianne Long, and 2 family memberships to the Marconi RCA Wireless Museum, which includes a personalized membership card, unlimited visits to the museum, 4 one-time museum guest passes, free admission to member events such as summer's speaker series, subscriptions to the Marconigram email bulletins, discounted tuition for youth summer science classes, and the use of the Education Center for private events. This was donated by Bob Fishback, the Vice President and Interim Executive Director.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Carpenter. Moving along to reports and discussions. First item on our agenda there would be the business manager candidate and appointment. Ms. Henderson, would you like to start by reporting out?
Sure. Nancy, Terry, and I joined administrators and members of the business office last week to interview 5 candidates for the business manager position that needs to be filled for the July 1 vacancy. It was very nice to meet and talk with all 5 candidates. After the interviews were over, the team deliberated and determined which candidate was the best fit for Monomoy Regional School District. We are pleased to share with the public that we unanimously agreed that we as a school committee should offer the position to Michael McMillan. Michael is a Cape Cod resident that is raising his young family here. He is extremely qualified to step into the role of business manager here at Monomoy. His last 2 positions were as Director of Finance and Operations and Business Manager for 2 districts off Cape. He currently holds a business manager license through DESE as well as an Associate MCPPO certification, which are both essential for this position. He has experience creating, fine-tuning, and implementing school budgets that best meet the needs of all the students and the community. When creating the budget, he believes in a process of open communication with all departments, creating a priority list of needs for the district, and then looking at the monies available and how to determine how best to meet those needs. He also shared that long-term planning is an essential part of budget planning for any district. Michael has had experience of playing a key role in large-scale projects during his time at the past districts. He has also worked in districts that own and run their own buses, which will come in handy here at Monomoy. He is very knowledgeable with using data and technology that keep things organized and simplified. Overall, Michael shared with us his passion of making sure that he is creating and implementing a budget that enables the students of our district the best possible education that we can provide them. His responses to many of our interview questions conveyed both his acumen when it comes to school finance and also revealed insightful practitioner who understands how to promote strong interpersonal connections. His depth and breadth of experience speaks for itself and is why he was the best candidate for the position of business manager for our school district.
Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. Dr. Carpenter?
I just want to add, we reached out to check references with Michael, and I think I have never heard superintendents and others with more glowing comments about any individual we've ever hired. And I think, to your credit too, Michael, a few weeks ago, I had Miss Jordan over there comes to me and she's like, "You have to go and see this state, the financial state of the schools presentation that they were doing at Cohasset, and this is something we could go and learn from." And I was just in the back of my head thinking, it's like, okay, well, here's somebody I hope applies for our position, and it's nice to see you here.
Great, thank you. We're very, very excited, and prior to our meeting tonight, we had executive session where we had further discussion and report out on the committee, and had made our motion and voted to have Mr. McCaskill, McMillan. I know McCaskill. Maybe it's him. Have Mr. McMillan join our community here at Monomoy School District, and we're thrilled to have you. At this time, I would like to ask the committee for a motion so that we can formally make our decision here on the committee.
I would like to move to appoint Michael McMillan as business manager at Monomoy.
I would second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any abstentions? Okay, motion carries. Great, congratulations.
Hey,
Welcome
congratulations.
to Monomoy. If you would, you don't have to, but if you would like to say something, you can. Okay.
Hey, thank you very much. That was a really nice description. I really appreciate it. Really hope I can live up to your expectations. I'm really excited to have this opportunity. I've lived in Harwich, and I've lived in this area for a long time, so not a long time, but 7 years, and so I've got to know Harwich and Monomoy and Chatham as well, and to be able to be part of that, of the community in Monomoy is something I'm really excited about and really looking forward to. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And welcome.
Yes, welcome.
Yes.
Okay, moving on, item number 2, senior class trip to Philadelphia.
Alrighty.
Good evening, everyone. We are here to present our proposal for the class of 2020 senior class trip to Philadelphia. I am Rory Carpenter. I am the senior class president for the class of 2020.
I'm Liam Mon. I'm the class vice president.
Hi, I'm Lily Ryan. I'm the class treasurer. I'm Kelsey Olson. I'm the secretary.
Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about is the itinerary highlights, what we're planning on doing right now. So first we have the Liberty Bell, get some history in, keep it educational. Then we're going to move on to a ghost tour, which we found on the school website. And then we're going to tour the Eastern State Penitentiary, which has also a haunted tour. It's a lot of haunted stuff. And then we're going to spend a day in Hershey Park, get some stuff going on there. And then we're going to have a dinner dance cruise, kind of like a farewell type dance, last dance together, and then go to the Philadelphia Art Museum. So yeah.
So just to talk about the price aspect, currently we have 78 students signed up to go to Philadelphia, which is really great. We've chosen to do quad rooms because it would be the most financially effective. With our current number, the trip would cost around $488, probably less with the amount that's going. We should be able to contribute around $50 per student just with the class funds that we have now. And hopefully as that grows, we can help more students. So we spent the past few months fundraising. We've done quite a few bake sales at both Harwich and Chatham's Christmas strolls, also at the Powder Puff game. We've done a popcorn fundraiser, and that was proved very lucrative. We've done senior t-shirts, again, very lucrative. On March 13th, upcoming, we have Mr. Monomoy, which is a fun tradition that we're excited about. And on February 28th, we're doing Monomoy's first senior semi-formal. So that should be very fun. We're all excited about that. So our policy this year has been that the funds from each fundraiser are divided equally amongst those who participated. So that sort of rewards the students who are able to, who are willing to come and show up and help out the class. The share that they earned will be taken off from the final payment of the trip. So yeah.
Thank you for your time and consideration.
Does anyone have any questions?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Queen of questions here. Dr. Carpenter?
So no Geno's and Pat's steaks?
Oh, that's what, yeah. That's what we're going to talk about.
We do not have Geno's and Pat's on the schedule yet, but we'll see what happens.
Oh, I see, okay.
I'd also like to know from the class president, is the trip to Hershey Park because the last time you went, you were too short to ride on the big boy rides?
It's like a roast.
No,
I didn't know we could do that.
the best option for our class.
Ah, good answer.
Well played.
Good answer. All right, now for the hard questions. Does anybody have any questions before I go?
Oh,
Go
I just
ahead,
have one question. For anybody who financially can't afford this but would like to go, what's the plan?
So as with most things that we do with our class, we always try to make sure that everyone who wants to participate can. So again, with the our policy of those who show up can get a portion taken off the trip. In addition to that, after that money is calculated, if students are still in financial need and cannot pay, then we have class funds that will cover it. So we're definitely being accommodating to that.
Great, thank you.
Sharon?
And I really liked the way you did this with the participation in the fundraisers. Do you have any idea how much per whoever participated, how much would that's going to defray anything?
So, I know with the bake sales, we need close to 400, right?
Yes.
And then close to 600. Okay, so with those combined. So with that said, we had about, I don't know, like 10 kids per fundraiser down there. So, we can probably, that boils down to about $60 per kid. So it definitely is, as it adds up. That was just the bake sales. Those are the numbers I have off at the top of my head. But as it accumulates, I'm sure that we'll be able to, depending on how much, how many fundraisers students participate in, hopefully, upwards of 100 and maybe 200 even.
And how many kids in your class?
There are 133, correct? Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
133?
that's more than 50% that are planning to go.
Yes.
Sharon, did you have another question? You
No,
okay right
thank
now?
you.
When is the trip scheduled for?
The trip right now is scheduled for the Memorial weekend after Memorial Day, so May 30th to
Okay, thank you.
June 1st.
And my next question is, of the 78 students, do you know how many of those are eligible for the fundraising funds? I mean, not in particular, but I mean, yeah, all 78 of them happen to have participated, or?
All 70, I think 78 people are eligible to participate in the fundraisers. However, most do not because
So only those, so 78 people have signed up, but only those who participated in the fundraisers get the money that were raised at each fundraiser.
Correct.
And-
Although that $50 that we had mentioned on the previous slide, that would be for every student who goes. That's from what we had before we started fundraising this year.
So previous to these fundraisers this year, each student gets $50 from the
Yes.
class, and then any fundraising this year towards going to this trip, whatever fundraiser you worked at, you get a portion of that. Now, what if you didn't work at all the fundraisers, but some of them?
So we do it on a fundraiser to fundraiser basis.
And you keep track of all? each
Yes,
fundraiser?
we
Wow,
keep, yeah,
good
we
for
have a
you.
spreadsheet, everything, and we divide it up or we do divide it up equally. So if you participate and you show up for the entire time and you're there helping, then you will get a portion. You will get that portion too.
And chaperones, one chaperone for every 10 students?
Yes.
Okay. And those are obviously from the district?
Yes. Right now we have Ms. Creedon, of course,
Okay.
and Dr. Otto.
At the moment, that's what we have.
Okay.
We don't know how many students are coming, so we don't want to invite chaperones until we know how many we need. Ms. Felice will
Okay.
probably be one of them as well. She is beyond that.
Okay, great, thank you. Terry?
Great job, everyone. My question is housing, like a hotel, or you didn't get a price to stay at the Eastern State Penitentiary, did you?
No.
I thought it would be cutting costs.
That's the 488 for the quad?
Yeah, so that
Quad?
would, through this company that we are doing the trip with, they calculate all that together and they book the hotel. It's really, the company that we're working with has done a really great
So
job
you're,
so far.
you're already at the 50, so there's not gonna be a further discount at this point.
Not that I know.
There may be beyond that 50, they price it to 50.
More serious question. Would the housing be like downtown Philadelphia or walkable, or are you gonna, probably based on price, it may or may not be? A little outside, yeah, okay.
Did you take the bus with you? Question, where did the senior class go last year?
Yeah, Quebec.
Ask you, Leah. They went to Quebec, okay.
We did, yeah.
Great, do you know how many, about the same amount of people probably?
No.
Oh, 30, okay.
really?
So we've gotten
Wow.
a really great response this year.
Yeah, fantastic. Enthusiastic class.
Yeah.
All right, great. And I don't think we have a vote for this one this evening, so we'll vote on it on our next meeting, which should be ample time for you guys, unless there's an emergency that we're not aware of. Okay.
Pretty good. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good job, guys.
Great job.
Oh, thank you.
Maybe applause just for me. What? Gavel on, I'm not using the gavel, I don't like it, but. Next item on the agenda would be the off-site athletic transportation. We had this on last week's agenda as well for discussion. Karen Gummett had presented to the committee the numbers that she'd come up with, approximate numbers, if we were to provide transportation to the various teams that we do not at this point. Noted, I believe, I have it here in front of me, but at this point, we want to just continue the conversation, discussion. Any questions after that presentation that folks have that you've come up with? And I would open it to the members right now to kind of talk and move forward and see where we're gonna go. Is there anyone that has, Ms. Scott?
So I wasn't at the last meeting, but I did go back and watch. I took notes even so I wouldn't forget. So a lot of my concern is, I think it's a great idea to look into, to do, because I could see the value in it, but I'm really concerned about how many kids are actually going to want to use it and how many families are going to actively use it both directions. So, I can see it being needed for after school while families are at work still, if the practices, end at 5:30 or even 7 or 8, based on what I remember from last week or wrote down from last week. That getting to the practices is going to be challenging, but getting home, the parents are going to want to pick them up. And so one of my concerns would be, all right, well, we're going to have this bus, we're going to provide it, then are we gonna require every kid to ride the bus to practice? And then have something similar to what we currently have for games where the parent has to sign a waiver to allow the child to be picked up. But then if the child's being picked up by another teenager, it kind of defeats the point of it being safety. So I feel like that the hockey parents were very well represented. Well, I can't remember how many families were here the first time they brought it up before Christmas break. And being that we want to make sure that it's equitable and you have to provide transportation for the golf teams, the sailing team, boys and girls, hockey, how many of those groups are actually going to use the transportation versus waiving out of it? So I think it requires a lot more research to kind of go through those families to say, hey, do you want this? And if you want it, do they want it this year, or do they maybe not want it? So if we have a young, I think, if I remember correctly, we have a younger boys hockey team right now, so there aren't a lot of drivers. And so what's gonna happen in 2 years when they have their license and they're allowed to drive their teammates, not just their siblings? Then all of a sudden, are they gonna opt out of it? And then we're gonna have this amount of money in the budget. And Sharon, I think you made the point at the last meeting, making sure that money is being used by the most number of students. So how is it going to benefit, how is that amount of money, the $17,000 or so, gonna most benefit the most amount of students? And I also wanna be sensitive with the fact that there are students that can't participate because they can't get there. So I understand that, and I understand that I work till 4:30 or after most days. I do have flexibility with my job, and I understand you can't sign your kid up for a sport because they can't get there. So you have to be sensitive to that, but is there another way other than providing transportation for everybody who has practices off-site? And then the other part is that if you're not providing transportation for the teams that can walk, so the kids going to Brooks Park and the kids going to Cranberry Valley for golf, if they're walking, are they actually walking? Because the seniors, I'm pretty sure, are not walking from Monomoy High School over to Brooks Park. I would put money on it, and I'm not a gambling person because I don't like to lose. But I'm pretty sure that they are not walking over there. So that kind of defeats the point as well. If we're talking about safety for the kids, they're still driving. Granted, they're only driving, what is that, 1,000 feet, whatever it is. But it's still the point of safety. So those are my thoughts from everything. So I think a lot more research needs to be done and a lot more conversations need to be had. There was mention at the last meeting also about a policy and having a policy developed for it. So I think the conversations with the other families of the other teams, as well as going to the policy subcommittee to say, is there something that can be drawn up that would make it so that the students can't just waive out of using the transportation? Because I don't know, Karen, I'm looking at you specifically just because I don't know how many families waive their kids out of game transportation. I know I've done it a couple of times for my daughter, but specifically because her game was in Sandwich and we were going off Cape for the weekend, and I didn't want to come back to pick her up to go back off Cape. So I don't know if that's regular occurrence for most families or not.
So I would say it's mixed. Some families, specifically or more so families who school choice
Okay.
waive the transportation the most frequently.
Which makes sense.
The idea with that waiver is we really want the kids riding to and from the games on the bus, but to say that they can never go home with their parents, people plan trips on a Friday and we're gonna go right from the game, and things come up, so we try to work together. And that's the idea of that. So I would say, I don't know the exact numbers, but it happens on every team, every season, more than once.
Okay, and a quick follow-up is, and I've never paid any attention because my daughter's a sophomore and doesn't really have a whole lot of driving friends. Could I sign the waiver and say she's gonna go home with friend X who's a senior? Or is it the game policy I'm talking
Does it have
about.
to be 18 or older?
Yeah, does it, how does that work?
No.
It has to be an adult or
Again, in
parent.
extenuating circumstance where we know well in advance, and I usually get also the principal's permission for something like that.
So that's not normal?
No, that is
Okay.
not normal. It's usually,
good.
sometimes
Glad to
it's
hear that.
a parent waving for another parent to drive.
Right.
But not, we don't typically let the students drive
Okay.
each other or themselves. Like I said, there have been situations where, you know, students have been coming from SATs and it's a tournament game and they have to be at the ferry or whatever. I mean, we've had different
There's always
circumstances where
extenuating
we've
circumstances.
allowed students to drive, but again, with the principal's permission, with both parents' permission, et cetera.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So it's fair to say that there's, the intention of the waivers to travel for special circumstances being picked up or dropped off by a parent, but it's probably misused in most cases because we are a regional district, there's school choice, there's a lot of other variables that we're
Correct.
dealing with.
Correct, yeah. And some, I think some people misunderstand too that it is supposed to be for extenuating circumstances. And I am pretty open-minded, that it's supposed to be 48 hours in advance to me. But as long as they get it to me in advance, I'm usually, I don't want to say no. I mean, you know, things come up and people, and everybody's busy and people forget or whatever happens. So I try to work with families as long as they get it into me in advance.
Tina?
Karen, I've got a question as I was thinking through this. With the girls' hockey team, so when they're playing a game, how did they get to the regular game? Just set aside the practice for a minute. How did the girls, I know there's
So their
four
home
of them.
games,
Yes.
their home games, they get themselves there. They
Okay.
either carpool or, there's only 4 of them, so it's a little
Right.
bit easier for them. And I'm not sure, I think 2 of them have their license.
Okay.
So, but I'm not sure if they drive themselves or if a parent comes and picks them up and drives them over. But they get themselves there.
Okay,
And they do for their away games as well, because the bus leaves from Charles Moore. It's 3, you're talking 3 schools for girls hockey. So they go meet at Charles Moore, and then they go from there to their away games.
okay. And for the chaperones, I was thinking about the chaperones for the girls. So who is the chaperone? I guess whoever the coach is that
For what?
for the girls' I'm sorry, ice hockey. I've got field hockey on the
For
brain.
games?
Yes,
So
for any-
practices,
yeah.
there wouldn't be a chaperone, so the kids would be on the buses alone.
Oh.
And for games, coaches ride the buses. So
Okay.
and that's across the board, every sport, every season. All coaches are expected to be on the buses. So there's always an adult on the bus for away games.
Okay, because one of the things that I was thinking about, if we move to do this with the boys' hockey team, I guess I was thinking about who's the chaperone. If we're going to provide this, who would be the chaperone?
That's a good question. I think it's a lot to ask, and I'm sure one of the coaches would do it, because he feels pretty strongly about making it easier for his student athletes, as he should. But I struggle with that because I think that that's hard to ask him to leave his work early. He works another job. To leave his work early, to get here earlier, to get the kids to the rink, instead of just meeting them at the rink and then being able to go home. So, I don't know. When transportation was provided in the past, they did not have a chaperone on the bus for practices.
Okay, thank you for that. The other request that I'll make, kind of feeding off of what Nancy said, I would like to hear from the golf families and the tennis families and the sailing families, because I think if we're going to do this, I really want to hear from everybody. We need to get buy-in, in my opinion, if we're going to do something like this.
While we're on the topic of hockey, because that's where this kind of originated, back to Tina's question, for the boys hockey, when they have a game, do they have to travel to Hyannis rink and then get on a bus there to go to their games?
They don't, they get picked up here.
They get picked up by a bus?
Yes.
Because are their games typically at Hyannis?
So for their home games at Hyannis, they get themselves there now.
Okay.
For their away games, they get picked up here. So the two co-ops are a little bit different. Our boys hockey co-op, we are the whole school. So I manage the entire program, and that includes providing transportation. So we have our buses here. Before, when we used Cape Destination, they were in Harwich, so they would pick us up, then they go pick up Mashpee, and then they go to their games. And so that's what we continue to do. If Mashpee can have, if a van's available and they have a coach to drive it, they'll meet us at, usually it's Gallo Ice Arena, and we pick them up there and then go to the games off Cape, because a lot of the boys' games are off Cape.
Okay.
But it's long days long nights on the bus.
And do we currently have a policy about someone being on the bus with the athletes other than on a game?
Not that I know of.
Okay. So hypothetically, if they've got their practice, as I have written, we'll get back to hockey for a moment, 7 o'clock at night on a Friday, and we're asking for the coach to be the chaperone, and I don't know where the coach lives, but let's just say Dennis. That coach has to come from Dennis, come to Monomoy, get on the bus with the team, which all have to be here at 6 o'clock, to get there to 6:30 for a 7 o'clock practice, and then that coach has to drive back with them here.
That would be correct.
And one of my inclinations is that that bus will be empty on the way back, because every one of those kids' parents is gonna pick them up to bring them home. You know, the tennis, I'm not trying to pick on one sport or the other. Hockey is an animal of itself. Tennis, they're walking through the woods. The circumstance is very different. Eastward Howe and Cranberry, they're right here. The circumstances are very different. You know, they say most accidents happen within a mile of your home, but, you know, now we've got a highway involved, and there are just a lot of moving parts. And I agree with Tina and Nancy that this comes down to policies that we need to talk about. I agree that I think maybe our next step would be to ask for some type of a survey from each of these teams, which this will impact. And in that survey, full disclosure of what this might look like, you know, what this obligation looks like. And, you know, we can formulate the survey or whatever, but I think that might be the best step to kind of get a feel for what we're looking at. We know that this is not going to be intended for this year. This will be for 2021. We've got a little time still if we're going to incorporate it into the budget, but we've got to get a better feeling of the need and the desire, and really be honest about what it'll look like.
That's
for
my
all these
concern,
teams.
or one of my big concerns as well, because I know that my feeling is, you know, if we do it, I don't want to pay for it if nobody's using it in either direction. So therefore, I want it to be a mandatory thing. And I know that there are a lot of students who, when they can drive, are not going to want, they're going to want to drive themselves. I think that's a good idea to find out.
And that's the gray area with our waiver currently, because you can't have a waiver and then tell them when they can and can't use the waiver. I mean, obviously, it's not being used for its intention in some cases, but in some not. But the waiver can't control it either, and that's when we really need to speak to policy as well. There was a question over here. Oh, Chair.
I echo the previous three members of the school committee. It's funny how the devil truly is in the details. I used to schedule sports and coached. I never heard of chaperones other than the coach. So this is all sort of new to me, that you'd have to oblige that. Secondly, we're in the midst of this 21 budget, and just in the past 20 minutes of me listening, it's been easier to structure the general budget than it has been listening and figuring out how we do this. And first of all of the administrative and team leaders, principals, they've submitted needs and wants, as you have too, I'm sure, to the superintendent and the leadership team. And we're trying to sift through that, and we're about in the middle of that now. Unfortunately, it may be just me, other than it's been discussed for a couple of months. That has not been on the list to make it happen. Now, $17,000 for a large multi-million-dollar budget is very findable, but before we do, I really think we need clearly some type of policy, some sounding out of those sports mums and dads. And obviously, if someone said to me, sure, I want a bus. I mean, I made the comment last night at a meeting here that the regular busing, our regular pickups in the morning and afternoon drop-offs, all you have to do is stand out front of the afternoon bus here and find out that either the kids have snuck out of school early, which they haven't, but they've got activities. And so the busing that we've paid for, which we do and have to, clearly there's a point at which it's very, very difficult to guarantee that X number of 30 bus, a bus has 30 youngsters in the morning and 30, they don't. As a result, to get down to small numbers of 4 or 5 sports that never had this, and there is a safety issue, I realize that, and the fairness, but one could argue that after football practice and after basketball practice, boys and girls here, youngsters who are younger than 17 could say, gee, I wouldn't mind a bus home. So that being the case, I think we need to continue another month or so to try to look to find the money, because once we commit, it's for every year hence, and at the same time square away some type of clear policy to what we're trying to say with the kids, and not be stuck a year from now realizing that, you know, of the X number of kids that signed up, half of those kids are still getting rides to and from these games. So this too will solve somehow or other, one way or the other. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, Scott.
Just one, maybe it's a concern that I have about the conversation about the need for chaperones on the buses is that we launch buses every day to pick up kids and don't have chaperones on the buses. I think we have very capable bus drivers that, you know, will let us know, let Karen know if you know, if there's something that's happened on the bus that we need to address. You know, so I am a little hesitant to, you know, to layer on chaperones as being necessary when we run buses every day that don't have chaperones. So just a little point of information.
I wouldn't want them to not have their coach on the bus for the games, though, so what's the difference?
Well, that I'd agree, but I think the buses we're talking about are buses to go to practices, and I think that's I think that's in many ways for me not any different than the buses that we run around town to pick up kids to bring them to school. But I agree, when you head off to the game, you've got your coach with you.
Mary? No? Okay. Nancy?
So I had, kind of talking about practices. The girls practice some days before school. And I'm just thinking logistically, I live in Chatham. My daughter's playing hockey at Charles Moore. I would have to come to Monomoy, 10 plus minutes drive here, for her to take a bus to Charles Moore before school. I'd rather not. I'm sure she would rather sleep later. She doesn't play hockey, but I'm sure she would rather sleep later. So that's just a food for thought. A second thought was the question of the necessity for the boys hockey, which was where it started, was initially getting to practice after school, but not necessarily after practice. So I'm just wondering if there's been any thought into just a one-way transportation, and if that is, you mentioned at the last meeting about having to pay the drivers to be there for the full practice to bring them home. I don't know if it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other, just to like let them go. And then my third thought was, do we have to use buses, possibly use a smaller van? I don't know if that would necessarily reduce costs, because I know you priced it based on the collaborative busing. So those are just my thoughts as we were talking. But I still think it needs to go back to conversations with the actual team members to figure out what they will actually want and use.
I think there's a lot of scenarios, and I don't want to put Ms. Gumet on the hotspot tonight to have to come up with all of
Oh,
those
yeah,
answers.
no.
Yeah, no, I don't think
No,
that's
I'm
what Ms.
sorry,
Scott's
no.
trying to do either.
That's not my intention
I think
at
she's
all.
just stating, and I just wanted to clarify that.
Sorry, thank you.
And I think, again, back to Terry, back to everybody, this has to do with policy. There's a lot of thought got put into this. I think the more you start changing the type of vehicles they are, the more difficult it becomes.
True.
It's either you have a bus and it goes to and from, or you don't. That's just my opinion. Is it possible to do one way? I think she addressed it in the meeting, but I will rewatch it myself. And
I actually don't know if I did. I mean, it is
we just talked
possible.
about I think the whole loop, like by the time it did
I'm
the
not
whole
sure.
loop, Mary.
And you did mention there was another district that did do a one-way transportation, so that like sparked my thought.
Oh,
because
yeah,
I feel-
Falmouth does.
Because I
Falmouth
feel like
does, okay.
that like Nancy's saying that it would be more getting the kids there. What I heard from the hockey parents was it's hard because they can't get out of work, you know, and they can't get them there. So I wonder if we can be creative in thinking about this, but I think the first thing is feedback from those other teams.
Yes.
It's great that the hockey parents were here and talking to us, but, you know, if we could survey them or somehow request information from them, that would be like the start to see what is the need.
Yep.
Well, and I think you then go back to also, is it equitable to only offer it for one way, not the other? What if there's two students that parents are police officers or nurses and they work different hours? I mean, there's just,
Yeah.
you can't please everybody.
Right.
So, Sharon.
I know that last time, Karen, you provided like a spreadsheet for us. And I'm wondering if that, maybe something like that could be developed, and if you could, or through the coaches maybe, find out some of this information. It seems unwieldy to do something at a school committee meeting.
Yeah, I absolutely will find out whatever you want me to find out.
Would it be appropriate we come up with some kind of a survey, or you come up with some kind of, with your resources, if there's a way to just do a quick, of those teams that we're talking about, which would
Absolutely.
be boys and girls hockey, boys and girls golf, sailing, I think that's it.
Yep.
And tennis, I think, goes on there, right? Or is
No,
tennis
they
not?
walk. Tennis.
They
walks.
walk, but do
Yeah.
we still have to offer it to them, correct?
Yeah, that's the question. Yeah.
That's the question.
I think if you're
That's-
talking, you might as well offer it to them and say.
Yeah.
They're gonna, I would assume they're gonna say, sorry, I assume they're gonna say no, but.
Well, if I could just add
Absolutely.
more mud to the conversation.
Do it, Terry.
I would be more, similar to our seniors who are about to go to Philadelphia, I'd be more interested to hear how many kids beyond 78 who are gonna be able to pay for it can't go because they have no money. I'd find a way to have those kids go. I'd be interested to know golf, tennis, female hockey, male hockey, et cetera. Those 5 or 6 that we voted on 5 years ago, and the parents were thrilled to have us create a co-op. And there was no issue of how the kids were gonna get there. One piece of data I know is, yes, there were about 11 youngsters from Monomoy Regional grade 9 up that said no to any of those sports because they couldn't get there or get home. Then if I had my way, I'd find a way that those kids will get on that team and we'd find a way home. It wouldn't probably be a school bus, but we'd arrange that. So someone did say that, yeah, and maybe I'm vaguely forgetting 2 weeks ago, that maybe there was 1 or 2 kids, and I know it's hard to find out.
I can tell you this, nobody has come to me telling me that they couldn't play because they couldn't get transportation.
Yep, okay, thank you.
That was a quick survey.
That was well done.
Yeah, we got it done. Okay, all great comments, great conversation. I think, Karen, if we could work on some type of a survey.
Yes, I will do
And then
that.
let us know when that's prepared, and we'll be happy to put that on the agenda. I think we're just trying to figure it out. Another month would be fine, 'cause with my timing wise, budget and all that good stuff. So not immediate, but.
Sure, absolutely, no
Okay,
problem.
perfect. We really appreciate all your research on this and your answering questions on the spot.
No problem,
It's
anytime.
phenomenal. Yeah,
Thank
you have a
you.
lot to juggle, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to the FY '21 budget. Dr. Carpenter.
Yay.
I have a gavel tonight, so just.
Yeah, well, The good thing is we have Michael McMillan here, so Michael will actually be doing the budget presentation. Everyone's never seen it. No, I was actually thinking that, because I'm constantly told every minute matters, that we could just do the cliff notes of the budget.
love that.
The cliff notes would be, this is a 2.64% increase over last year, which is our lowest budget increase since in the 7 years that I've been here. We do manage to put forward a wonderful strategic initiative that is going to be elevating our elementary ELA curriculum in this budget, because minimum required contribution shifts towards Harwich. The assessments are going to be unequal, or the assessment percent increases are going to be a little unequal between the two communities. But overall, this is a 1.78% assessment increase for the two towns. So that's the short version, and now for the 43 slides.
I got a gavel.
So it's a level staff, level service budget. And we present this every year. There's state aid that comes in for Chapter 70 funds. These just came out yesterday in terms of the governor's numbers. So so this was put together since between 2 p.m. yesterday, and now we put it together to go determine how the state funding and minimum required contributions that all came out yesterday afternoon impact the two towns and what their assessments would be. One of the things to point out is we've heard a lot in the news over the last year about the governor and the state wanting to increase the amount of state aid for schools. So the yellow line up there is the state aid, and you'll notice that in the last couple of years there's been a rather appreciable increase in the slope of that line, so there's more state aid coming to schools. But you'll notice that the slope of the green line, which is the state aid coming to Monomoy, has not changed appreciably during that time. So so there's more state aid that's being driven towards some communities that are in need. Communities like ours that have, and it's hard to say this, relative wealth, and I think that the wealth of our two towns is the property wealth that we have, and the challenge that we have is that the families that we serve, who tend to be the year-round residents of our communities, do not necessarily reflect some of the property wealth that the two towns have. The minimum required contribution, which plays a big role in calculating the assessment, has been slowly, gradually increasing for Harwich and slowly decreasing for Chatham, and that's really due to enrollment changes happening between the two communities, where Chatham is losing more school-age children than Harwich. And again, this isn't like they're school choicing out someplace. There's just fewer school-age children that are coming up through the births in the two towns. So the foundation enrollment, our budget is based on a 3-year rolling average of enrollment, and it's foundation enrollment. Foundation enrollment is the children that attend public schools in our two towns, except for Cape Tech. Cape Tech submits its own assessment to the two towns, but if students attend Monomoy, they show up in our foundation enrollment. If students from Harwich or Chatham attend another school district, Nauset or DY or Barnstable, they'll show up in our foundation numbers because we are fiscally responsible for those children. Or if they attend Lighthouse Charter School or Sturgis Charter School, they'll show up in our foundation enrollment because, again, we're fiscally responsible for those children. The orange line up there is really sort of the trend in minimum required contribution. You'll notice that last year, minimum required contribution actually went down for Chatham. It has tipped back up, and it's going up this year for Chatham, even though the enrollment for Chatham is dropping. The calculus behind foundation enrollment is rather elaborate, but it's a combination of enrollment, but also wealth factors within the communities. And you'll notice that the foundation enrollment in Harwich has also dipped a little bit in this fiscal year, but not as much, relatively speaking, as it did in Chatham. And that has swung the minimum required contribution up more than, so Harwich's increase in minimum required contribution has increased proportionally more than it did in Chatham. In terms of our budget, we are trying to move forward in this budget, or are moving forward in this budget, some of our strategic initiatives within the strategic plan. We have, ever since I've been here, tried to build budgets along very reasonable class sizes. Our class sizes at the elementary level are roughly 18 plus or minus 1 on average across the grade levels. At our middle and high schools, they're 19 plus or minus 2. And we build budgets anticipating class sizes. And the other thing that's really important to us is to make sure that our budget that we're presenting is one that fits well within the two towns' fiscal wherewithal. As I mentioned, it's a level service, level staffed budget. We will, in the course of next year, be shifting 1 FTE's worth of staffing from Harwich Elementary School up to the high school. It's not like we'll move a elementary school teacher to the high school teacher, but just that staffing resource, because we're seeing the bubble that's currently in 7th grade, or enrollment bubble that's in 7th grade, is going to start reaching the high school, and we can anticipate that in next year's budget, and really for the next 3 years' budgets after that, that we'll be adding progressively more and more staff to the high school, as the numbers at the high school will be increasing while our numbers at the elementary levels are decreasing. So the governor's budget numbers that were released yesterday are in this. We also have one slight shift in this budget than sort of the draft that we had worked at or put out before, and that is that we have health insurance has a 6% placeholder for an increase. We were carrying 5%, but in a conversation with the town managers, Harwich is carrying a 6%, and we just wanted to make sure that we're mirroring a health insurance placeholder that is consistent with the town of Harwich. The rates for health insurance should be set by the end of this month by Cape Cod Municipal Health Group, but at the moment that's one of the budget unknowns. As I said, the 3-year rolling average shifts a little bit towards Harwich. It's a 0.9% increase in the 3-year rolling average when it comes to how operations in debt are assessed. Transportation's assessed a little bit differently. It's not based on the foundation enrollment, but it's actually based on the students from Harwich and Chatham that are in seats in classrooms at Monomoy, and that has a 0.5% shift towards Harwich. We have a $100,000 commitment towards OPEB in this budget. That continues our pattern over the last several years of having $100,000 set aside towards OPEB in the budget. Last year, we reduced, in conversations with the towns as we were getting our budget moved forward last year, we reduced our budget by $50,000 which eliminated a $50,000 funding towards stabilization, which is a reserve account the district can use for things that they would capital projects that they might otherwise borrow for. This budget restores that, so it does support sort of long-term strength of the district that way. In terms of factors behind budgets, just enrollment, we are 65% Harwich, 21% Chatham, 14% choice. The district enrollment, this budget anticipates a rather flat enrollment going into next year. Currently, we have 1,892 students attending Monomoy. We anticipate having roughly that number of students last year, a few less at the lower grade levels, a few more up at the upper grade levels. Class sizes, as I mentioned, are in that set in those class size parameters, and one of the things that some on the committee noted is that there's a difference in class sizes at third grade and fourth grade at Chatham Elementary relative to Harwich Elementary, and those would be places where we would be opening up to those two grade levels for school choice. Again, not adding an additional class, but filling what I refer to as empty seats to bring in some revenue to the district without adding additional resources, and that would help resolve some of those class size inequities, but again, keeping classes still very reasonable in size. Last year, we were concerned that an increase in out-of-district students who require intensive special education needs might be a rather appreciable budget driver, and it was. This year, we actually anticipate the out-of-district number decreasing slightly, so we may see some fiscal relief when it comes to out-of-district placements in FY21. Charter school and school choice enrollment trends. The green line at the top there are students that are choicing into the district. You'll notice in the last few years that number continues to increase. Families want to be here. They want to go and take advantage of the educational program that we're offering. At the same time, the orange line that's projected up there, school choice out of the district, has been dropping off over the last few years. Families are happy with what they've got here. We're seeing fewer heading out. And then our charter school enrollment, students that are leaving the school district for charter schools, which are sort of a more expensive per individual that heads out, has remained relatively flat over time. In terms of some of the ways we offset a budget, our excess and deficiency account, which is our reserves, and it's when we have money that left at the end of a fiscal year, it would roll over into that. If we get some aid from the state that comes in mid-fiscal year that's not built into a budget, that would roll into our excess and deficiency account. When I started here 7 years ago, we had hoped that over 7 years we would get our excess and deficiency up to 4%. As of last year, we got excess and deficiency not above 4%, but we actually got it just slightly above 5%. When excess and deficiency goes over 5%, funds above 5% need to roll back to the towns. So what we are doing here is we have for the last 2 years used this year and or the proposal for FY21 and for what we're using this current year, FY20, we're using $550,000 of excess and deficiency to offset how much our budget is on the two towns. We also, because that excess and deficiency is so healthy, we're proposing to do what we did a few years ago when we brought forward a new math curriculum where we used our excess and deficiency account to support rolling out Math in Focus. This time we're suggesting using $120,000 from excess and deficiency as a one-time by to move forward a new elementary ELA curriculum. School choice, as I mentioned, the school choice numbers continue to go up. Our school choice revenues are very positive, and it puts us in a position to actually use an additional $100,000 in school choice money towards next year's budget compared to what we used in this year's budget. So we used last year $1.2 million to offset the personnel costs for the district. In the FY20 budget, we're proposing $1.3 million of school choice money to be used in the FY21 budget. In terms of circuit breaker, we are using in this budget $290,000 of circuit breaker to offset the cost of the budget. This still leaves us with a reserve in circuit breaker of about $274,000, which is important to keep some money in circuit breaker in case we do get unexpected out-of-district costs that that are outside of a budget, that we have some place that we can go to cover those needs. In terms of tuitions going out of the district, both school choice tuitions and charter school tuitions, I mean, this is a big budget line. Each of these are about $1.2 million, $2.4 million in total in terms of funds that go out of our district every year to support our students being educated either in other schools or in or other school districts. In terms of the strategic initiative that we had mentioned of the elementary ELA curriculum, there's a process that's going on right now so we don't have an absolute, this is the curriculum that we're going to move forward, so we don't have a dollar sign to attach to it. What we want to do is make sure that we come up with a elementary curriculum that's consistent between the two schools. At the moment, we have Harwich Elementary Schools using one curriculum, Chatham Elementary Schools using another curriculum. Both of the curriculum that we are using don't meet expectations as sort of rated by ed reports. Mark Smith has been running or working with teachers in a task force to come up with identifying a curriculum. They have narrowed it down to 2, and I anticipate that sometime this spring, Mark will be bringing forward the curriculum that he and his task force are recommending to the school committee. At that point, we'll have sort of a dollar sign on what that curriculum is going to cost. But as we go into these conversations, understand that we'll be looking to use excess and deficiency to purchase it as a one-time cost, not to go and embed the cost of that in a budget, which would create in some ways sort of an awkward little blip, where you have $120,000 that you are purchasing in one year in the budget, and the next year it's not there. So it's excess and deficiency is a nice way to just to make sure that our budgets going forward are smooth and not just sort of artificially inflated one year because we had this huge curriculum purchase. So the FY21 draft budget in detail. So this slide is the slide that every year you, as a school committee, vote the budget by this slide, by budget category. Punchline is this is a $41,826,623 budget. If this looks at that slide over those budget categories over the last handful of years. Every year we also go and talk about just different maintenance and technology things that we're doing. One of the things that we have been proud of is that we are keeping these buildings in better shape than when we came together as a district. But we also want to make sure that the educational technology that's available in these buildings is state-of-the-art and is supporting our educational mission. So you'll notice at Chatham Elementary School that we're continuing to do some roof repairs to keep the roofs that we have on keep the roof that we have at the middle or at the elementary school going until I anticipate probably next year, we may be sort of moving forward and having to go through the school building authority process of sort of notifying them that it's time to start replacing a roof. So it's coming closer and closer to us needing to replace that, but we're not there yet. So it's listed here as repair. And then there's some, 2 classrooms that'll get some new flooring at Chatham Elementary School. Chatham Elementary School will also get Promethean boards. It was in walking through Harwich Elementary School, was it 2 days ago, with Mary, and one of her teachers was just showing some of the neat things that she's doing with kids on the Promethean boards there. Again, Harwich Elementary School, some money set aside for roof repairs, and again, HVAC controls. Same at the middle school. Each year we have the laptops that we issue for one-to-one at the middle school and high school. We have some refreshing of those that's sort of built into our budgets each year. One of the things that you'll also notice up there at the high school is we have a line in there to do some vape detectors in some of our bathrooms to address the vaping epidemic that everybody's heard about. In terms of how the budget's funded, 83.8% of the budget comes from the assessments to the 2 towns, with Harwich, being 62.9% of it, Chatham being 20.9% of it. The next biggest chunk of funds to run the school district comes from Chapter 70 state aid. That's almost 9%. The next biggest slice of the pie up there are the school choice revenues. So all of those students that are choosing to come here at roughly $5,000 a piece bring in 3% of our budget. And then you have the lesser pieces of the pie up there being our use of excess and deficiency, our transportation aid that comes in, circuit breaker that comes in from the state, and then charter school reimbursement funds. In terms of how all that money then gets expended out, the bulk of a school district's budget are personnel costs between these salaries and benefits. That's makes up about 71.7% of our budget. Again, some of the other big pieces up there, that blue pie slice, which is 5.6% of the budget, are tuitions, charter school and school choice tuitions that are heading out. There's a slice up there for the orange one in the top left part of the pie up there are special ed tuitions. Those are the out-of-district tuitions that head out. And then when we were having such a long conversation about athletic transportation, and if you look at what athletics and activities are in the Monomoy budget, it's like the smallest pie piece up there. It's less than 1% of our budget are athletics and activities, even though sometimes that seems to be some of our bigger conversations that we have. We've also each year put together a slide that just looks at how much does it cost to educate a child a day, looking at the total costs of the budget divided out by 180 days and the number of kids that are attending. So it costs $127.66 a day to educate students. And again, the bulk of that comes as the personnel costs. So this is same as the pie chart, just portrayed differently. Again, $41.8 million budget. This breaks it out by some of the larger categories. And again, looks at each of those larger categories and what's this year compared to past fiscal years. As I mentioned at the Cliff Notes version, this is a 2.64% budget increase. And again, after the governor's numbers came out yesterday, there is an increase in Chapter 70 aid. There's an increase in regional transportation aid. there's an increase in charter reimbursement over what we got last year. And in addition, as I mentioned, we're using $100,000 in school choice revenues to offset this budget over what we used last year. And those factors combined position the assessment to actually be significantly less than the budget increase, which is why we get to a combined assessment increase of 1.78% when you have a budget increase that's that's 2.64%. And just in terms of bang for the buck, Monomoy's per pupil expenditure based on the last published amount on the DESE website, which was from FY18, Monomoy's per pupil is $17,503, which compared to the average Cape school district is a bargain. On average, the Cape school districts are paying $21,309 per pupil. We're almost $4,000 less than that, and you'll note that we're over $3,000 less than Nauset to go run ours, and significantly less than any of the towns that feed the Nauset system. The reason that you have the towns in Nauset is that the towns each get, have their costs to run the district that, that superintendent union would be assessing. Plus you have the regional school district for their middle high school that would have a separate assessment to the towns. So we go from budget to assessment, because at the end of the day, everybody just jumps to the assessment page, goes to the last line, and then it's like, when is he going to stop speaking? So we'll get there quickly. So the assessment ultimately is the bill that the school district sends to the town to pay for the educational services for the children. That bill is largely driven each year by this minimum required contribution. As I mentioned, there's an increase in that minimum required contribution for both towns. Chatham's went up by $64,000. Harwich's went up by $412,000. Which isn't a 1/3, 2/3 ratio. So that difference there is largely driven by increases in the there's more Harwich kids than Chatham, and that Chatham's losing children at a quicker rate than Harwich. So it's that shift in the 3-year rolling average is driving a lot of this. All right, so this is the assessment sheet that we give out. It shows up on 2 different slides, but starts at the $41.8 million budget. From that, we're backing out $120,000. Then from that we have the Chapter 70 state aid gets taken off that, or excess and deficiency, the charter school reimbursement, Medicaid, interest and revenues. So there are $4.8 million of offsets that reduce the draft budget. So we end up with a $33.1 million operating assessment. That operating assessment then gets split between the 2 towns based on that 3-year rolling average of foundation enrollment. So Harwich is paying 74.35% of that operating assessment. Chatham is paying 25.65% of that operating assessment. And you'll see up there, you've got the transportation assessments done the same way, where we have what's the total cost of transportation. The school district gets an offset for regional transportation, so that gets subtracted off, leaving a transportation assessment of $771,000 that again gets split based on the ratio of students that from Harwich and Chatham that are actually attending Monomoy classrooms, and that ratio is the 74.8 and 25.2. The debt gets split along that 3-year rolling average of foundation enrollment, and at the bottom line, we have we can jump to sort of the total FY 21 draft assessment is a $36.4 million assessment that is split $27.3 million for Harwich and $9 million for Chatham. Then if you go and compare it to the FY 20, has us with a actually net decrease in Chatham for their assessment and a net increase in Harwich for their assessment, which happened last year as well, so that the total assessment is a 1.74% increase, but because of that enrollment shift, which led to a minimum required contribution shift, we see that Harwich's assessment goes up by 2.62%, and Chatham's goes down by 0.68%. And again, when you hear that the assessment's going up by 2.62%, and you'll hear in either of our towns that a town department is going up by 2.5%. Keep in mind that when town departments go up by 2.5%, benefits on the town side are sitting over here, and benefits are a significant driver. So if you were to pull benefits out of that, this is, even in Harwich, that assessment increase is significantly less than 2.5% if you were pulling benefits out. Just last thing is just sort of the timeline in terms of budget. An important one to keep in mind are, so tonight we have the presentation before you at January 23rd. On Monday, it's a double feature. So come to Harwich Town Hall at 5:30 for the first showing of the Monomoy budget before the Harwich Selectmen, followed immediately by a quick trip to Chatham Town Annex for the second showing of the Monomoy budget before the Chatham Selectmen. So we wanted to make sure that both towns hear the budget presentation on the same night, and it's going to be a double header that evening in two towns. So I appreciate that the Harwich Selectmen were able to move their meeting earlier, so it's going to start at 5:30 to get us on, and we'll be out the door within about 75 minutes and over in Chatham for the second feature. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Dr. Carpenter?
I have a couple small questions.
Absolutely.
A small question. So the Chromebooks, let me go back over to my question I wrote down. So you mentioned refresh. What is the life of the average Chromebook?
I will have Mr. Birchfield.
What was that?
Sorry.
Jim Birchfield.
Jim Birchfield, Director of Instructional Technology. Chromebooks, we have a lease program where we lease them for 3 years, a 3-year cycle. 5th graders, 8th graders, and 11th graders will receive a new one like every 3 years. And the life expectancy of the device, it ranges anywhere from 3 to 5 years, depending on how well they're taken care of and how nicely they're treated, that kind of thing. But the ones that we've purchased in the past, we've been able to keep some of them going for 5, going on 6 years. We just kind of got lucky with some of them, and kids took good care of them, and so we're able to keep them going. So it really depends on what happens at the end of the lease. If we buy back some of them, often we need them for testing and extra loaner devices. For some kids, accidentally break them, and we need to give them something in the meantime. So But in general, I'd say 4 years is a good, average lifespan.
Okay, thank you very much. And the other question, I don't know if this will end up being a rhetorical question or not, but I'm just curious, the 6% for Harwich, I know that's what Harwich is doing for the insurance. What is Chatham doing differently? So what do they put in their budgets? Does anybody?
I think, if I recall correctly, Jill Goldsmith mentioned that they were level funding, but I don't know what,
Okay.
I don't know if that's, they're going
Something to do
with the
with
same
contracts.
increase as the previous year or not.
Okay, all right, just curious.
Yep. Any other questions?
I just have a question because I'm new at this whole budget thing.
Mrs. Henderson?
Thank you, sorry. Is the per pupil expenditure the same as the daily cost to educate a Monomoy student?
You could, yes, sort of. So the way we calculate the daily cost for a Monomoy, to educate a Monomoy student, is taking the total budget divided by 180, divided by 1,862 students, and you come up with that number. The state has its own little calculus on per pupil, and in fact, the state, if you go onto any school district's DESE, profile and click on the finance tab, the state lists 2 per pupil expenditures. There's a per pupil expenditure for students that are sitting in your seats, and there's a per pupil, there's something that they refer to as a total per pupil expenditure, which I think if you look at it, that's kind of your per pupil based on your foundation enrollment as opposed to the kids that you have in the classroom. So those are the all-in total per pupil expenditures, and I don't know what sort of things the state might not include in that. I don't know if Katie has any greater wisdom, or even Michael, we can test him.
So the daily cost is from us, or from you, and the per pupil is from the state?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Sharon?
I heard the comment that you mentioned about the other town departments having the benefits separate. Have you figured this up, what it would be for our cost and what our assessment would be if we removed the benefits?
We haven't, we could, but at the end of the day, it's, this is the bill that we give the town. We know how much the benefits costs are in the budget. We could back it out and say, okay, what would it look like? But it's sort of when we present a budget, we have to, by virtue of being the regional school district, it's an all-in cost. It includes the benefits. When it was Harwich Public Schools under the town of Harwich, the school district's overall increase was here, but their benefits were calculated separately.
Yes, I understand what you're saying, that this is the hard information because that's actually what is the cost. I think it just might be helpful, not that, to be able to make comparisons for some people when they're trying to, if at the meeting, for instance, when different, or even at town meeting, when different people are presenting the cost of these different things, and if I hear the library or something else is at a lower percent, I would prefer if people understood that if we were comparing apples to apples, it would be a different number. That's all.
Thank you, Sharon. Ms. Scott, are you working on that calculation right now? I see you.
I'm just calculating. I like numbers.
Oh, you're just calculating. Okay. Any other questions or discussion on the budget at this time? Thank you, Dr. Carpenter. No? All right. moving forward, substitute pay rate adjustment as presented by Business Manager Kitty Antonio at our last meeting. At this point, we are just looking for a vote. If there are not any questions or discussion regarding the substitute rates adjustment requested. Is there a motion to approve the adjustment to the substitute rates as presented at the last meeting?
I move to approve the substitute rates as presented from the last meeting.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Tina. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Abstentions? Oppositions? Motion carries. Thank you, everyone. And the next item on the agenda is the 2020-2021 school year calendar. There was a discussion of a pre-Labor Day start for students and staff. I believe you have two calendars in the schedule, in our folders, which show the differences that are being proposed. And I believe it was brought to our union as well to vote on that for our teachers, because I believe they are not able to start.
I can give it
Yes,
a little context
I
here.
don't misspeak.
So,
Context away.
to put this into perspective, as we head into, sort of the mid-year, some folks, particularly, I'd say, you have folks that are in special education are starting to schedule meetings out into the beginning of next year, and so I'd be walking through any one of our buildings and I'd start getting questions on, so when are we starting school? And so I have the, we'll call it the informal dipsticking of having conversation after conversation with different people asking. And my response has been that by contract, and the contract says that our school district cannot start with students coming back before Labor Day. So so we have historically had our teachers come back on a Wednesday and Thursday. The contract specifies that there will be a 4-day Labor Day weekend, and then students come in the following Tuesday. As so what I was clearly hearing from everybody that I was bumping into and that were sort of chiming in, there clearly was a want to have us start before September 8th start date, which is what the contract would say we should come back. A challenge that I mentioned to the school committee, I think when we last met, is a September 8th start date is as late as you can possibly get. It's the latest Labor Day that a calendar allows. And if we schedule all of the vacations that we typically have and put them in place and overlay this year's calendar on a September 8th start, it has our 5th snow day being June 30th, which doesn't leave much wiggle room if we, and it's silly if we have a snowstorm, but let's face it, we tend to not have snowstorms a lot, but if we have a hurricane come through and maybe one appreciable snow, suddenly your 5 days are gone and then some. And then we're in a pickle, with the superintendent saying at sometime in February or March, it's like, okay, we're truncating April vacation, or we're going to come in on a Saturday, and we'd all, so on my end, I was thinking, okay, I keep hearing people saying they would prefer to start before Labor Day. I would have less anxiety if we had a little more buffer than the last of our 5 days, of 5 built-in snow days being the last day in June. And then there's my own editorial here. I think when I first came to the Cape, I kind of felt we started school a lot later than I was used to off Cape. And I, you know, and I heard, and at least what I understood historically is, you know, many of our staff, many of our students, you know, work in these summer, summer jobs, and that it's part of the way the sort of local economy is and operates. And over my last 6 summers here, I've come to appreciate that that maybe the reality as it plays out on the Cape might be a little bit different than just a simple let's start after Labor Day, in that I think that there are ample opportunities for for staff and students to have gainful employment at the end of June. And if you are trying to rent out a home, or you want to go and have some quiet time at a beach, the last couple weeks in August are pretty quiet around here. The weekends, kind of pick up, but it's I think that it's that our tourism tends to be loaded towards the waning days of June, when we would potentially still be in school, and it's rather quiet as we head into Labor Day. So I think a number of the Cape districts are actually starting to shift their calendars away from this traditional after Labor Day start to allow for some before Labor Day starts. Not way before Labor Day, but there's some that are starting to shift to have students come back, particularly in the years where you have late Labor Days, like a Labor Day that's showing up on the calendar September 7th. So I suggested to Sherry Armstrong that the union go vote on where their membership would be, because as a school committee, we really can't go unilaterally say, okay, we're going to start before Labor Day without the union chiming in. So so there was a vote. The majority of our teachers favored a pre-Labor Day start for students, following the calendar that's provided to you. And my suggestion to our union is that we might want to, in our next round of negotiations, discuss reworking the wording to accommodate pre-Labor Day starts when it makes sort of calendar sense for us.
Any questions or discussion on the calendars, Tina?
Yeah, I'm curious. I have 2 questions. In 2015, no, actually, I take that back. So I guess it wasn't 2015. For some reason, I thought 2015 had the 8th, but no, actually, I do.
No, it did.
The 8th,
It did, yeah.
So what happened that year? Was it just a good weather year? Do you remember? I mean, was there any, like, how late? Do you remember? I mean, I was here, but I don't recall.
We got out late.
Must have been a good weather.
I also tend to be. We have been lucky. Like we've not had to. Yeah, we haven't had to use many snow days lately. But when we have when we close, it's not for snow. It usually is for other natural catastrophes.
I don't remember this being a discussion in 2000.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, and we were here, and I just don't remember it being an issue. So I was just kind of curious. Oh, go ahead.
I can say I was in school till June 30th that year.
Oh, interesting.
But I think because of Monomoy and the professional and the early release days, the days are different, and so. But it was close.
We also had better luck that year on. I know that year there were a number of households in Yarmouth that I think were without power for longer periods of time than ours, and I believe again, we're that much further out, and we're just a little luckier on what some of the damage was.
Okay. And then my other question is, and I know we're still, I guess, talking about this, but do you anticipate any pushback from families if you switch the calendar?
I anticipate that no matter what I do, I'm going to get pushback. It's par for the course. So I suspect that if one were to go survey the families too, I think you'd probably find something very similar to where the teachers are. Keep in mind that many of our teachers are our parents too.
Yep.
Ms. Scott, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for recognizing me, Chair, Madam Chair. I had a similar concern, and I emailed Dr. Carpenter about it, just because it's kind of late. I was almost booking a vacation the weekend before Labor Day, a long weekend, like Friday through Monday, and I didn't, but I think that other families, they may have that week traditionally as a vacation because it's the week where childcare ends. And so, I'm sorry, that's the week where there is no childcare. So rec is ended for both towns. And so I think that's my concern, is that families have already planned vacations that week. But I don't know, surveying them is really the way to go, or if it's just, you know what, this is what we're gonna do. We understand this is late notice. We're gonna accommodate you for having to miss school or whatever it is. I mean, I'm in a complete agreement that getting out June 30th, I can hear my son now going all the way to the end of June, so I completely respect going earlier, and I don't see that being a problem going forward. I just think changing it now at this late date would be a bit of a concern.
Terry?
I don't know how late we are. I have to look that up. But I think
Not late in terms of what we've done in the past, but late in terms of people having had plans.
Let's see, what was I going to say?
I'm sorry.
I think the early start calendar is logical. I think we're here to speak for the parents. I think if we choose not to and get a polling, we'd be faced with the same issues of some parents are finding 6 months vacation. That is difficult, but I think I would strongly urge we move on and make a judgment regarding the early start. The logic is far stronger explaining that away than to try to survey.
I agree. I echo Terry that our decision is to represent the parents, and as a parent, I looked at both sides and I was like, well, I'm going to have to find childcare in September, or I'm going to have to find it in June. So it doesn't matter. Sharon?
How many other school districts are starting before, as of this year or last year, on the Cape?
I think I put in an email to you. I'd have to go.
Okay, I don't remember.
Pull it up. But I know some of those that aren't are in discussions with their union, much the same way that we're having this one, and that we reached out to ours to sort of get a pulse on what the wants of the teachers and staff that work for us are, and and then bring it back to to the committees.
And was on this polling of the teachers, what % of the teachers preferred the old earlier one than the traditional one?
Cindy Hershey, that it was more than 2 to 1
Okay.
for the 27.
It wasn't a polling, it was a vote.
So for those in television land that didn't hear Cindy, it was a little over 2 to 1 for the earlier start.
Then I would say I am conservative on making changes, and so for this kind of thing, and especially since our teachers union, the contract is up at the end of next year. So to me, it would make a lot of sense to plan this out so that a year from now, we had planned it very thoroughly, maybe more schools will be doing that. I don't want to have any kind of backlash from the parents or community that they weren't given. I do know that people make flight plans like a year in advance on something, so I don't think it would hurt to move it to 1 year later, that's all.
Tina?
Yeah, I think I like what Nancy said too, because about the whole year out. My concern is everything you said makes perfect sense.
Mm-hmm.
I won't have kids in the school system next year. My final one graduates this year. So I don't really have, for me personally. But I think given the history in the last 2 or 3 years, I think I would feel more comfortable if I could hear from some parents. If they're all in agreement, hey, it's not a big deal. But I feel like I would rather at least put it out there. It doesn't mean that it's going to change anything. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. But I feel like it's my duty to hear what the parent community says. I mean, yeah, I don't think I can speak for every parent because I haven't talked to I haven't really talked about this. I wanted to have this conversation tonight to understand it better. But I just feel for myself, I would like to survey or have people come and speak, and I need to hear from parents.
Well, we're not voting tonight, and you certainly you have time to hear from parents, and people have the opportunity to come and speak about the calendar. And then ultimately, we are going to have to decide and do what's best, for the district at that time. So there's, it'll be on our next agenda to vote on, so it's a little bit of time.
Right,
And
so
I would
2
encourage-
weeks. So anybody listening, if you have something to say, please come.
I would encourage anyone to come and discuss it. All right. Oh,
Every second matters, but I know that even, Mark and I need to, at next meeting, when we have a vote one way or the other, we have folks that we want to schedule in for the beginning of the school year, so it's, for, those opening days professional development, so it's, so I fully get that. I also would encourage the committee, this is me channeling Brian Whittegren, not for this conversation, but maybe to have a conversation at a later school committee meeting about calendars and potentially consider doing something bold. And I would suggest at some point to look at changing one of our vacation weeks to something different than what it currently is. Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket do this each year so that their families can get more affordable plane fare. And what we're seeing as school administrators and principals are families who are taking vacations at times when it is financially conducive for them to take vacations, and us having attendance conversations with families because they're taking a vacation when they can, and some of our families that work in the tourism business, they, by what their employers need to be around during the vacation weeks that we have in our calendar, so they can't take off then, so instead they're taking off other times, and it might actually be financially beneficial to our families to be bold one way, and I've come to appreciate this. I know it was one of the things that Brian Whittegren, one of our former chairs, was passionate about, and I think the longer I've been here on the Cape and the longer I've kind of experienced what our families are dealing with, I think it's something to consider. Do you do February vacation on a different week? And again, that one definitely have a conversation about what you're doing out in some future year. But I do think a bold conversation, I think, would be merited at some point.
So can I just ask for clarification? So are you proposing just still 2 vacations, but moving the second one, or going to 1 vacation?
No, I think that 2 vacations, I think 2 vacations is what people have come to expect. I would suggest moving at least one of them to a time that is out of sync. You know, sort of move it to when Nantucket or Martha Vineyard go, which is out of sync with the rest of Massachusetts. But by virtue of that, you find it financially beneficial for families to actually be able to afford to go to.
Right, but
Florida.
we're off topic, so.
Oh, we're off topic.
And we're off
Okay.
topic, so
Okay,
thank you
Madam
for
Chair.
that
Thank you.
adage, Dr. Carpenter, and we will be voting on the calendar at our next school committee meeting. At this point, are there any subcommittee reports?
I don't really have can I have an announcement? I don't,
Tina?
well, actually, Paula, did we have any? For legislative, I'm going to, next Friday, which I will report, I'll ask for some time on the agenda, Madam Chair, just to give a report. So next Friday, I'm going to go to the MASC, the School Committee Association. They're having a legislative breakfast. I did register, so I will be attending that next Friday, the 31st. So I would like some time to report back.
Perfect, we will put that on there,
Thank
thank
you.
you very much. Okay, and actually, one more comment just to confirm with the school committee members that on February 11th will be was just in front of me, thank you, the budget hearing. We had talked about which date it was gonna be, and I just wanna confirm that the budget hearing will be on February 11th.
At what time?
6
for the budget.
6
6
yeah.
PM is the public hearing.
Public hearing, yep.
6 o'clock.
Moving on to the superintendent's report.
I'll be brief. So in your packets, there's, Leah has been putting together a school attending children report. I'll share this with our select boards. The question always comes up, how many students are in the district? This sort of lists kids that live in Harwich and Chatham, where are they attending classes? Are they with us? Are they school choiced out? Where are they school choiced out? Are they charter schools? So you get a feel for how many, which towns, but it kind of gives you a little bit. This is still a little bit of a draft. I think Leah has requested all of the different entities to get her data back by the 25th, but this should be near where everybody is sitting out there. So when we talk about foundation enrollment, this should give you a feel for what's behind that foundation enrollment number.
And Leah just told me that those X's on the side are where she's just still missing some information.
No, I haven't.
All those lines.
Yeah, so the excess means I have the most current information.
She has the most current information, could be, I misheard her.
And then there are just 3 dates to keep in mind. As I mentioned, we have our doubleheader for budget conversations with Harwich and Chatham on the 27th. That's Monday night starting 5:30 at Harwich Town Hall. Then there will be some follow-up conversations at the selectmen's meetings on the February 3rd and 10th regarding the regional agreement to get that on to the warrants. And last but not least, there will be a conversation with the superintendent on February 24th at 6:30 here in the high school library.
Great, thank you very much. And we have one final action item, would be the train contract for 1 year. This is the group that manages our rooftop units, and we are up to year 5. So I'm just looking for a motion to approve the planned maintenance and service program contract for option year 5 for $61,500.
So moved.
All in favor?
I would second
Oh,
that.
excuse me, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. Presentation of the warrants this evening. And at this time, we ask if anyone has any public comments. Speakers are limited to 5 minutes additional time for discussion of the chairperson. Yes, Charles? Oh, sorry, I didn't see you, Mary. Can we have Mary speak first?
Mary
And
first.
then we'll go to Charles. Thank you.
Thank
Back
you.
to
I'm Mary Oldak, principal of Harwich Elementary. I just wanted to let you all know that a week ago this evening, the Harwich
Community Preservation Commission voted to put forward $500,000 in funding for our Harwich Community Playground at Harwich Elementary School. And we still need to get that approved at town meeting, but we're very excited and are very grateful for the community support. Thank you.
Thank you, congratulations.
Yes.
And Charles?
Charles Gruska, 6 Teabury Ave, Harwich. Two things. One, on the school calendar, struggled with this in the district that I worked in for years all the time. One of the pieces of wisdom we learned was if you're going to make changes from what's the usual norm, as far in advance as you can do that as possible. So there was some comments about people having make vacation plans, flights, etc. And that gets to be the issue. So whether it's a bold change, as the superintendent talked about, or the Labor Day impact, that's just the experience that I have. You are going to get kickback no matter what, but parents do make plans in advance, whether we do that in our own personal experience or not. And on the transportation for athletic practices, as you know, I spoke on that in public comment last meeting. Done a lot of thinking in the last 2 weeks, and a lot of the thoughts that came up, especially the kind of things that Nancy shared, Tina shared, a lot of data that's needed in terms of determining the actual need. But then I felt I needed to say something on Terry's question, because that was a big thing for me, is anyone being left out from being a part of something, whether it's because they can't afford it or because they can't get there or whatever. And you know, it's true that parents may not report, or students may not report that need. I would say that you have to keep in mind that many people don't express a need when it's a matter of something internal and family dynamics, or whether it's a matter of finances. So we never know when someone says, I've never heard anybody say they needed this. I don't think we can ever assume, or you can ever assume, that that doesn't mean that the need is out there, and that there may be students being held off from activities because of situations that they would never report or ask for. I mean, part of why we do, there's a lot of changes now going to having everyone have school lunch, was to end the stigma of students who needed free or reduced lunch, who qualified for that, just feeling that there's a stigma attached to that. And sometimes there's just a stigma to say there's a need, and people are usually people in need are intimidated by the school system. They have a lot of nerves, but they don't automatically go to school administrators and school committee people for whatever their own experiences to express that. So just, you know, something to keep. And I was thinking of that too, even the class trip. I was kind of disappointed in the numbers of students who are going on. I was envisioning. Now, I don't have experience at the high school level. All my experience was middle school and below, but it seemed like a lot of students are not going on a trip that you would think the whole class is going to celebrate. You know, we try to keep our trips to something affordable, and usually a day trip, even for a graduating class, and absolutely never would schedule something that we weren't sure that we had funds to back up for every student to attend. In my particular case, we had an amazing PTO, and that was their main function. They were the funding source for all of the things that individual students or families couldn't afford. That was like their main, and I know I don't think we have a PTO at the high school that can provide that kind of support. But we were really, didn't want to schedule things that any student had to feel like, geez, how I wish I could do that, and I just can't. And I'd like to, and I can't tell anybody that it's because we can't afford it, or I can't tell anybody that my parents say, no, they can't get out of work to take me to practice, and they're not going to let me drive with one of my friends because they're nervous about that, and they see what kinds of things that can happen. So it's sometimes the simplest things, like it seems like the budget was the easiest thing on the agenda this year in comparison to some of those other kinds of issues. But I just felt the need to just share those thoughts from my experience in working with parents, and thank you for your consideration, as always.
Thank you, Charles.
Thank you.
All right. Motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion, meeting adjourned, 8:35.
Ah,
Thank you, everyone.
much earlier.
Earlier than last time.
I missed the good one.